Ethan sat on the worn wooden bench of a city park, his shoulders slumped, his face carrying the heaviness of a man twice his age. He was only 24, but life had already left him bruised. College hadn't worked out, the jobs he tried slipped through his fingers, and every time he scrolled through his phone, all he saw were friends showing off promotions, weddings, or new homes. In comparison, his own life felt like a stalled car on an empty road. On that chilly afternoon, he turned to Mr. Harris, a retired businessman in his 70s, who often volunteered as a mentor for young people in the neighborhood. Ethan's voice was low, almost cracking. "I don't want to waste my life starting from the bottom, sir. I just want that one big break, the shortcut that takes me straight to the top. Can you tell me how?" Mr. Harris, with his calm eyes and the kind of wrinkles that suggested both pain and wisdom, didn't answer right away. Instead, he studied Ethan carefully, as though measuring not just his words but the weight of his soul. "Before we go any further, comment where in the world you are watching from, and make sure to subscribe because tomorrow's story is one you don't want to miss." Finally, Mr. Harris spoke, his voice steady but gentle. "Ethan, sometimes the answer you seek can't be given in words. It must be discovered. Let me show you something." He rose slowly, motioning Ethan to follow. They walked through the winding park path until they reached a small garden tucked between tall oaks and iron benches. The garden was alive with color, roses of every shade, from crimson red to bright yellow, glowing in the afternoon sun. The air was thick with fragrance, the kind that stirs forgotten memories. Mr. Harris turned to Ethan and set a challenge. "I want you to walk through this garden and bring me the most beautiful rose you find. But there's a rule. You can only move forward. Once you pass a flower, you cannot go back and pick it. Choose wisely." Ethan blinked in surprise. A rose? He had expected advice, maybe a lecture about hard work or discipline. Instead, he was being asked to pick a flower. But then, he smirked to himself. How hard could this be? Surely I can find the perfect one if I just keep walking long enough. With growing confidence, Ethan stepped into the garden. At first glance, he saw roses that looked stunning, petals full, vibrant, and flawless. Yet with each one, he thought, maybe there's a better one ahead. Maybe the perfect rose is waiting further down the path. He walked past them all, his heartbeat quickening with the thrill of the chase. The promise of something better pulled him forward, step after step. Behind him, Mr. Harris stood silently, hands behind his back, watching with the patience of a man who had seen this same lesson play out many times before. Ethan's sneakers crunched softly on the gravel as he entered deeper into the rose garden. The sun filtered through the leaves, casting warm golden rays across rows of roses that swayed gently in the breeze. It should have been peaceful, but inside Ethan's chest, his heart was beating fast, half from anticipation, half from pressure. The very first rose he saw was breathtaking. Its petals were wide open, glowing like polished velvet in the afternoon sun. He bent closer, inhaling its fragrance, a perfect blend of sweetness and freshness. For a moment, he considered plucking it, but then his ambition whispered, "If the first rose looks this good, surely there's a better one ahead. Don't settle. Keep going." He straightened up and walked past it. A few steps later, another rose caught his eye. This one was even larger, its petals stretching with confidence, like a flame refusing to die down. Ethan hesitated longer this time, his hand hovering in the air. But again, doubt crept in. What if the next one is even better? What if the perfect rose is waiting just a little farther? Step by step, he moved forward, passing rose after rose. Each one seemed beautiful in its own right, but never perfect enough. His chest tightened with the growing pressure of choice. He wanted the best. He needed the best. From the distance, Mr. Harris watched quietly. His face betrayed no emotion, but his eyes seemed to hold the weight of decades of hard-earned wisdom. As Ethan pressed on, a strange unease grew inside him. With every rose he skipped, he felt both relief and regret. Relief because he still had a chance at something better. Regret because he knew he could never turn back. Minutes passed. Ethan was halfway through the garden now. Sweat beaded on his forehead, not from the heat, but from the gnawing realization that his chances were running out. He slowed down. The roses here were fewer, their stems a bit thinner, their petals not quite as perfect. He crouched beside one, its edges slightly browned, but still lovely. For the first time, he thought, maybe I should have picked one earlier. But his pride pushed back. No, you can't settle for less now. Not after passing so many good ones. The perfect one must be ahead. He pushed forward, but the roses grew sparser, weaker, and less vibrant. His chest ached as he scanned desperately for that one flawless bloom he had dreamed of. Finally, he reached the end of the path. His eyes widened in shock. Before him stood only withered roses, petals curled, stems drooping, colors faded. Not one could be called beautiful anymore. His hands trembled. His throat dried. He had gambled away every chance, and now there was nothing left to choose. His knees buckled, and he sank onto the edge of the path, staring at the dying flowers. What have I done? Behind him, the roses he had passed earlier seemed to mock him in silence, each one a reminder of what he could have chosen but didn't. With a heavy heart, Ethan turned back toward Mr. Harris, empty-handed. Mr. Harris raised an eyebrow when Ethan returned. "Well," he asked softly, "did you find the most beautiful rose?" Ethan lowered his gaze, ashamed. "No, sir. I kept waiting for the perfect one, but when I reached the end, only wilted flowers were left. I couldn't bring back anything." For a moment, silence hung heavy between them. The air was still, broken only by the rustling leaves overhead. Then Mr. Harris placed a hand gently on Ethan's shoulder. "That, my boy, is how life works." Ethan looked up, confused. "Opportunities in life are like roses," Harris continued. "They come in many shapes and colors. Some seem small, some seem ordinary. But if you keep ignoring them, waiting for something bigger, something perfect, by the time you realize they're gone. And they don't come back." The words hit Ethan like a thunderclap. His chest ached with regret. He thought of job offers he had turned down, people he had ignored, chances he had dismissed because they didn't look like the big break he was chasing. Tears stung his eyes. He whispered, "So I've been living like this garden all along, walking past every chance, waiting for the perfect one." Mr. Harris nodded, but his voice remained calm. "Success doesn't come through shortcuts. It's built step by step, by valuing each opportunity, no matter how small. That's the only path that leads to the top." Ethan clenched his fists, his mind a whirlwind of shame and realization. Yet, in the middle of his despair, a spark of clarity began to glow. That night, Ethan lay awake replaying Mr. Harris's words. They burned into his mind, refusing to leave. By morning, something inside him shifted. He decided to start small. No shortcuts. No waiting for perfection. He took a part-time job at a local coffee shop. It wasn't glamorous, but it taught him responsibility. Showing up on time, serving customers with patience, managing stress. He picked up freelance design work online, fumbling at first, but slowly improving. He even volunteered at a local community center, tutoring kids in math. Each small step didn't feel like much on its own. But together, they began shaping him. He gained new skills, made connections, learned discipline. And for the first time in years, he felt progress, not giant leaps, but steady, meaningful steps. Every time doubt crept in, he remembered the roses in the garden. Don't wait. Pick the opportunity in front of you. Make it count. And so Ethan kept moving forward, this time not empty-handed. Years later, Ethan shared his story with others, but he wasn't the only one. Jeff Bezos started Amazon in 1994 from his garage, packing and shipping books himself. It looked small, almost laughable compared to the giant it would become. Yet step by step, it grew into the world's largest online marketplace. Oprah Winfrey began on a local talk show in Nashville, facing rejection after rejection. Today, she's a household name, building one of the most influential media empires in the world. Howard Schultz, the man behind Starbucks, started as a barista. A simple coffee shop job became the seed for a global coffee empire. Walt Disney faced bankruptcy, ridicule, and failure with his first cartoons. But he never ignored the small chances, and eventually built the most iconic entertainment company in history. Ethan realized these legends weren't chasing shortcuts. They embraced every chance, no matter how small, and transformed them into stepping stones. He whispered to himself, "If they could turn roses into gardens, so can I." Years rolled by, and Ethan's life looked nothing like the stalled, hopeless days of his 20s. He wasn't the billionaire genius people wrote about in magazines, but he had built something far more meaningful. Success that was steady, resilient, and rooted in gratitude. At 35, he owned a modest but thriving design firm with a team of 15. They weren't changing the world overnight, but their work mattered, helping local businesses, nonprofits, and schools find their voice through design. Ethan still remembered the smell of coffee beans from his days at the cafe, and he smiled every time he mentored one of his young employees. One summer afternoon, he returned to the same city park where his journey began. The benches were the same, the garden of roses still blooming. But Ethan was no longer the restless young man desperate for shortcuts. He stood taller now, calmer, his eyes carrying a quiet strength. As he walked along the rows of roses, he whispered to himself, "Opportunities are like these flowers. If you hesitate too long, they fade. But if you value them at the right time, they bloom into a garden that shapes your destiny." For a moment, memories flooded back, the sting of regret when he first returned empty-handed, the gentle wisdom in Mr. Harris's voice, the countless small steps that had brought him here. And he realized something profound. The garden had never changed. It was Ethan who had. Life rarely offers shortcuts. Waiting for the perfect opportunity often means watching life slip by. Success is not a single leap, but a collection of steps, each one small, each one valuable. Every job, every skill, every connection, every moment, when respected, becomes a brick in the foundation of your future. Oprah, Bezos, Schultz, Disney, all of them prove the same truth. Greatness is built in fragments, not miracles. And Ethan's own story stood as living proof. As the evening sun dipped behind the trees, Ethan bent down and picked a rose. Not the most perfect one, but one that was blooming with quiet beauty. He held it gently, smiling, knowing that in life, as in the garden, true success comes not from waiting for perfection, but from embracing what stands before you. The camera of imagination zooms out. A man holding a rose, standing in a garden, framed not by loss but by wisdom. His story isn't just about regret. It's about redemption, patience, and the courage to act when the chance is in front of you. And as he walked away, rose in hand, his legacy was already blooming, not just in his own garden of destiny, but in every life he would inspire by sharing this truth. Life is not about waiting for the perfect chance. It's about recognizing the value of the opportunities in front of us. Ethan's story reminds us that too many people waste years chasing shortcuts, only to miss what could have built their future step by step. This lesson applies far beyond one man's journey. Think of careers. How often do people reject entry-level jobs, waiting for the big break that never comes? Think of relationships. How many miss meaningful connections while holding out for an impossible ideal? Think of personal growth. How many delay learning small skills because they don't seem impressive enough? The truth is simple. Greatness is rarely born in a single leap. Jeff Bezos packing books in his garage, Oprah starting on a small local show, Howard Schultz brewing coffee as a barista. Each one began with what looked like small steps. Those steps built the foundation of empires. The message is not to settle for less. It's to respect the journey. Every opportunity, no matter how small, holds the potential to shape your destiny. The roses of life don't announce themselves. If you keep waiting for perfect, you may end up with nothing but regret. But if you embrace what's in front of you, one day you'll look back and realize those small steps created the garden of your success. If Ethan's journey made you stop and think, hit that like button. It tells us we're making stories that matter. Share this video with someone you know who's waiting for the perfect moment, because maybe this is the story they need to hear today. And don't forget to subscribe. Every week we bring you powerful stories that inspire reflection and change. Now, I want to hear from you. What's one opportunity you passed on that you still think about? Or maybe, what's a small chance you took that changed everything for you? Drop your story in the comments. We read every single one. And if you enjoyed this story, you'll love tomorrow's video. It's about someone who turned the biggest failure of their life into the foundation of their greatest success. Trust me, you don't want to miss it.